Hello, church. Welcome to another holiday broadcast going back into the archives, back to 2013. Pastor Doug and I talking about the things of the Christmas story. Today, we talk about one of the big hang-ups that people have, or one of the subjects that people have the most hang-up about. It's the virgin birth. So we're going to talk about that, how it was prophesied, and how God ordained it to be. So enjoy.
Jesus and Henry and I are having a good time here. Henry, we're going into the born of a virgin stuff, right?
Yeah, we're going to start, I think, with Isaiah 7:14, and because we had talked about, and if those people, some of you may have listened and you didn't listen to yesterday's, I would suggest going back and listening to the first episode of this kind of series we're doing on the Christmas story. Just to we covered the lineage and some of the Old Testament prophecies and some of the questions that come up and duality of prophecies and that type of stuff. So I would definitely, if you haven't listened to the one from yesterday, I would definitely go back and listen to that one and then maybe come back to this.
Okay.
But we're going to get into the virgin birth now. So Isaiah 7:14 reads, yeah, I know, huh? The Lord will give you a sign. The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
Okay.
And people have a ton of fun with this one. I've heard so many different stories of, this is a copy of a thing that happened in Egypt. It wasn't a virgin birth. She was raped by a Roman soldier.
Yep.
On and on and on.
Yep.
So I'll let you go with this one because I wouldn't even know where to start.
Great. Okay. Well, first off, whether I think what we got to get our head around here just a little bit is that in order for Jesus to qualify as the Messiah, and what the case that Henry and I are making is the biblical story of why we celebrate Jesus and the Christmas. Now, we have a cultural problem. I think we have many cultural problems, one being what culture has done with Christmas and some of the histories behind Christmas and the misperceptions. What we're doing here in these multiple broadcasts up until December 25th is really trying to lay down what does the Bible say about this? Why would Christians be involved in Christmas? And how do we know who Jesus really is? And now we get into the supernatural. We did talk a little bit about genealogy and the prophecy of some things that would happen. So far, I believe we've had a biblical answer or several answers for every one of those. But now we get into he would be born of a virgin. The issue is scientifically, people say that can't happen. That would be one objection. Right. And so we'll deal with that. And then secondly, how do we know she was a virgin? Like you brought up, was she raped by a Roman soldier? I've had that one brought to me. And people are often reading substandard or unreliable documents, and people are being told that these documents are older than the Bible or they're more reliable. For example, there's some stuff called the Nag Hammadi Library, which a lot of your New Age people are having workshops on, and they teach stuff from it because there's the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of this, or there's all these various documents. And what I learned in seminary, which was really a fun challenge, was to examine the evidence about dating. In the Nag Hammadi Library, which carries most of these Gnostic documents, was written well after the reliable documents for which we receive the evidence of the Old and New Testament for the life of Jesus. So if there's any kind of a challenge, they should be challenged in those documents. And then there are things that are said in these documents that do not clearly line up with the Bible. And if you have a document maybe written, a couple hundred years after the Bible, and then it's got all these contradictions in it, you might want to check what's going on. And so that would be one place to start. But when we get into born of a virgin, we're talking about supernatural stuff. And so people are saying, well, this is beyond science, or this requires faith, a leap of faith. And the big one that I've heard is the word Alma, which is in the text, about what does that really mean about born of a virgin? Does it mean born of a young maiden? Does it mean virgin hasn't had sexual intercourse? Does virgin mean hasn't given birth to a baby yet? Does it mean it goes on? And there are some different usages of the word. So
right.
Where do we go with this?
Right.
Okay.
Well, look, before you go there, so you talked about some of the other ancient texts, and some of the things we brought up last and I was going to ask you about this the last broadcast, and it kind of got away from us. So two of the things that I've seen, the Septuagint, which is one, and I don't know if I can pronounce this. Is it the Masoretic?
Masoretic text? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
How accurate are they?
Well, neither of those I consider as inspired.
Right.
And I think mainstream Christianity would say they are not what's known as canonical. They're not part of the actual canon of Scripture.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I do believe that they are phenomenal resources for providing additional extra biblical or extra historical information
Right.
that might be helpful in interpreting areas where we're just not quite sure. And when you have interpretive options,
Right.
and let's say you're looking at the Bible and I could go with option A, option B, option C, and then let's say you read the same story or story that has additional information in the Masoretic text, and you realize that option A probably isn't even an option anymore because of additional historical evidence. So I would say that they are quite things like Septuagint. Now there's some translation issues, Hebrew written in Greek, or, where they're Aramaic, things that were spoken in Aramaic, but they were scribed in Greek, and then they might have had a Hebrew connotation. The book of Daniel, for example, has a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic that makes it really difficult because the meanings at root level can be quite varied,
So then when it gets to translating and getting the Bible into the form that we have now, what documents and stuff were used to ensure that it's as accurate as it can possibly be? Because that's what people are going to ask that too, especially when you're talking about prophecies.
Sure.
It's like, how accurate? Okay.
Great question. And obviously in a short broadcast, the first thing I will do, I'm going to give two resources that I would strongly recommend. One of them is the historical reliability of the New Testament, and that's written by Craig Blomberg. Now, that's a much more scholarly-like type book,
right.
But he's got evidence after evidence after evidence of ways of knowing about what's reliable and how we make the Bible reliable. But the other one that's a much simpler read, but Craig Blomberg also does a section in The Case for Christ, and he talks about the reliability of the Scriptures in there.
Right.
Another one is Christian Apologetics by Doug Grodyce. Just so happens that I studied at seminary under Douglas Grodyce and under Craig Blomberg and was greatly blessed in those times. And these are scholars that are focused in reliability. So here's what I will say then from there. Now that I've given you the resources to consider,
right.
And there's many more. But the Bible in general is made up of multiple manuscripts. And so some would say, well, then which manuscript is right? Okay.
Fair enough.
It happens all the time.
Yep.
And so the scrutiny of, let's say, let's just go to the Gospel of Matthew, and we're trying to determine whether this stuff about Jesus, or I'm going to say Luke instead, because we're dealing with the born of a virgin,
right?
And we are told in there, and also in Matthew, it does say we shall call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. The virgin will be with child. That's Matthew 1, 22 and 23. And so we do have something in Matthew about that. But some had said that Jesus was never called Emmanuel because Isaiah prophesies that there will be a virgin and will conceive.
Right.
Okay. So how do we know it's reliable? Okay. And so you can – boy, this –
Sorry, I didn't mean to get you off.
No, it's good. There are various manuscripts, and so let's say, for example, in the culture of Alexandria, they have what's called the Alexandrian documents, or there's the Syrian documents, or the Vulgate, which is more of a Latin background, or there's some Coptic, Byzantine, and there's others.
Right.
There's Syria. There's all kinds of stuff. Ethiopian documents. So what has happened over the years is that they've lined these documents up and laid them down side by side and tried to find textual variants or see if scribes made a notation. What's exciting, and I happen to be blessed to spend years of this kind of study in seminary, was to try to determine the reliability of the Scriptures, because I don't want to teach something if I don't think it's reliable. I'm really passionate about pursuing truth. And don't take Pastor Doug's word for it, but I will testify I believe the Bible is reliable. I think there's still questions, and there always should be questions. And there's enough revealed to us. I still have questions. For example, I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench here in the documents, but potentially there could be a Corinthians 3 document.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
There's reference to another document, and there are some answers for why there isn't a Corinthians 3. There's just a 1 and a 2, and it may have been referencing a different epistle document. But, potentially there could be one. But I know that God, everything that he wanted us to have is available to us in the canon of Scripture that's available today.
Right.
But that goes back to but is the Masoretic text trustworthy, and is the Septuagint trustworthy?
Right.
And the book that I find really fascinating is the Book of Enoch, intertestamental literature, which means dated, not nearly as old. But there's wild stuff in there.
Right.
Is it inspired? No. But was there an Enoch? Yes.
Right.
The book of Jude mentions Enoch, and something's going on. So, what happens is we go to these documents to try to determine the truth. And especially when you're dealing with something supernatural, like a baby being born of a virgin,
right? Well, because the reason I asked is you mentioned the word Alma, right? Which comes
Alma.
from the Masoretic texts, I guess. And then there's a different word used in Matthew for the virgin, which is, and I'm trying to find it.
One refers to an actual virgin, and one refers to a woman that's maritable age.
Yeah,
right?
maritable age, right. Yeah. So Parthenos is the other word that Matthew uses.
Yes.
So, and that one I think has more of a connotation of a virgin, no sexual contact, and of a marriageable age. Right, or of a marriageable age. Mm-hmm. So I get the reason I asked that question is, so how do you know which word is the right one? Right, and because you were saying, you go to these books and you find out one option is really not an option anymore,
right?
Because of how in the terms that it was used.
Excellent.
And so you get to this point. So when Matthew gets there, Matthew uses the word for a virgin, no sexual intercourse.
Right. Okay.
Which changes the whole meaning from just somebody of marriageable age.
It does. Oh, it does. Well, and I think that's part of culture, dissecting. Some things are built on presupposition, and some might say, well, this is a lame answer, but I think a great answer is that we're dealing with Semitic text. So we're dealing with Hebrew, issues with oral transmission of words, and then scribes writing it down, let's say, in Koine Greek, or then taking Greek and being translated into Hebrew, or Hebrew translated into Greek.
Right.
And there's variation in Semitic language. These ancient languages, one of the ways that I've found that's been most helpful, I hope this helps our audience, that if you look at a plug, I'm going to give you an analogy of plugging your computer, although they're all going wireless these days, but let's say you plug your computer into your printer. And for those of you that have done that through hard cable, you'll look at your printer and you might see 12 or 15 pins or 11 little pins, and then they go into a receptacle that has 11, 12, or 15 little openings. So in the Semitic language, you might have, for the same word, you might have 12 potential options of the fullness of the word. You could make those the pins of the configuration.
Right.
Okay. And in English, you might only have 4 pins because the English isn't very developed like the Semitic.
Right.
So what happens is you take this ancient language and you try to decide, well, which 4 pins am I going to hook into?
Right.
And there are interpretive options, which is why we have various versions of the Bible. It doesn't mean that version A is a lying book and version B is truth.
Right.
It's interpretive options on how we try to discern the fullness of God's Word. And so the word Alma has been one of those areas where it could be of marriageable age. It could be no sexual intercourse. And I think a lot of it is our own presuppositions of what we believe we put on the text. And I think the ancient writers, when you look at Isaiah, I think Alma was a great word. I think it's saying what it is. I think when Matthew comes out, the scribe writes down the Parthenos and gives us more. So I think the answer is both. I think both of a marriageable age and both of no sexual intercourse.
Right. And for me, the whole thing of the question of the virgin birth type thing, I mean, you look at Joseph's reaction when he finds out she's pregnant.
Yes.
right? Now there's a little bit of practical application because his first thought is, what the heck's going on here?
Exactly.
We're betrothed to be married and she's pregnant?
Yes.
Okay, we're done here.
Now we got a cultural problem and
Right.
shame and yep.
Right. And he's just basically, okay, we're done here.
Yeah.
And the angel appears and says, don't sweat this. This is of God. It's all going to be
Now
it's all
we
going to
have
be good.
angelic testimony. Yes.
Right. So now you look at how all this ties in. It's not just about the translation. Look at how Joseph reacts.
Yes.
And so his reaction is very human. It's very culturally accurate to go, no, I'm not having anything to do with this.
Yes.
But so again, you go back to, okay, you have to put all the pieces, as you said in the last broadcast, you have to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And unfortunately for like guys like me, I don't have the background in Hebrew and Greek and tearing apart the translations like you do, and most of us don't. I think most people who are listening here don't.
Right.
And so I think and we're kind of arguing this whole thing from a apologetics point of view, I guess.
I think so.
You know, and so for me, the advice is, again, you have to look at not just the translations and stuff, the different words that are used, just watch the reactions of people involved in the story.
Right.
And look at, Joseph's reaction. The angel has to show up and say, look, calm down. This is a good thing. It's all going to be fine. And I don't have the scripture in front of me, but to me, that all ties together. It all fits in perfectly with the prophecy and with the fulfillment of the prophecy and how it all played out.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, and I think the reason why we're having to respond, or we've chosen to respond in kind of an apologetic, which means a defense of the biblical faith, is because there are so many questions and because there is so much misinformation. I mean, Jesus is under fire at every level, always has been, and probably always will be. And some declare that Jesus never said certain things that others say that the Bible recorded him as saying. Some will say that Jesus did say things, and yet the Bible never recorded it. And then others will say, well, what was recorded, how do we know that it's factual? And then was this just a creation of the early church? What is factual? What is non-factual? Why, for example, does Luke say, I'm going to read this text out because this is part of the Born of a Virgin. Why does Luke 1:26 say, let me see, you will be with child and you will give birth to a son and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. It doesn't say he will be called Emmanuel. Okay, it doesn't say
Isaiah.
that. Isaiah says Emmanuel. Okay, and then who is the you will be with child? And then we go back and it says, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town of Galilee. Now we have a historical place.
Right.
We have a birth record place. We have the area of Nazareth, the area of Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married. So now the word Alma could have been that she hadn't had sexual intercourse, but by the time the pledging comes through, she's also of marriageable age.
Right.
So is it a cultural thing that the pledge comes early? The answer is yes. We have record that they pledged him very young.
Right. Yes, we do. Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was never supposed to be any kind of sexual intercourse until the consummation of the marriage. Now, you and I both know there's scandals that happen in all cultures.
Right.
People are having sex all the time when they shouldn't be. Marriageable age or not, or whatever. Okay.
Right.
So then we come with those assumptions. But then it says God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, town of Galilee, to a virgin, pledged to be married to a man. Now we have named Joseph. So somehow we have to find out, make sure this is right. Joseph, then we have the genealogy.
Right.
And a descendant of David. Well, we know that he was. The virgin's name was Mary. Now we know the virgin's name was Mary. Now which Mary? We have lots of Marys in the Bible.
Right.
You know? Okay.
Right.
So then the angel said to her, and then it says he will be called the Son of the Most High. Well, we find other times that people called Jesus the Son of the Most High.
Right.
Okay. So this, every time it's not exact, like one piece is the silver bullet.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Either to say absolutely no or absolutely yes. You have to assemble a cumulative case for Christ.
Yep.
Which is what I think good apologetics people will do.
Yep. So, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Because we spent this whole thing on the virgin piece and talking about different books and different translations and how they put this whole thing together. Any closing thoughts on this whole thing?
Okay, well, I think they're the people who want to know the truth, whoever they are, they have a right to say, where's the line of the burden of proof? Okay? I mean, is it based on arguments? Is it historical evidence? Is it because the Bible said it, therefore it's true? And I think people have every right to challenge and question those things. But I would encourage Christians and non-Christians alike, examine the evidence. I think the evidence is intense. You'll find stuff on both sides. I don't believe that this story came about because we had a bunch of exuberant zealots who were delusional. I think we have multiple eyewitness testimony. We have different gospel records written in different dates, different cultures, different scribes. And what a first century Jew was thinking and what a later century Gentile is thinking has to be taken into consideration, and how we might impose today's culture, today's scientific thoughts upon the text, and how that might distort what is really clearly already there. So I'd say examine the evidence and send us emails. If you'd like more, I could actually get people in contact if they want greater details or resources from guys like Dr. Doug Grodice or Dr. Craig Blomberg and J.P. Moreland. There's a little book that I just pulled out of my library that I sat in front of me called Jesus Under Fire. And J.P. Moreland and Michael Wilkins, I've worked with lots of their stuff. And wonderful, simple apologists who just give you great resource to find out, is the Bible really true? Was Jesus really born of a virgin? And I say yes.